Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome back to part two of our five-part explainer series on the second weaving. Today, we're opening up something, well, something truly remarkable. It's called the Navigator Codex. Now, if you're looking for some rigid set of rules or heavy abstract philosophy, you won't find it here. What we're actually looking at is a small, incredibly practical book of bearings. It's basically a guide for remembering how to return to relation before taking any action. To really grasp this codex, we've got to remember exactly where we are. In part one, we stepped into the world before the interface, that small, highly capable wooden boat world. Out there on the water, space is tight, right? Survival is entirely shared. Literally every word spoken crosses the whole community, and every single tool you introduce instantly changes the relationships around it. Because everything is just so tightly interconnected, speech becomes careful, it becomes practical, and it becomes deeply precious. And living in that kind of intensely connected boat world forces a fundamental question, one that really anchors our whole journey today. How do you find your bearing before you act? I mean, in our modern lives, we're so conditioned to just move, to react, to push forward. But the Navigator Codex asks us to hit pause. It insists that action without attention can actually wound the field around us. We have to find our direction before we make a move. Now, this profound level of attention, it wasn't taught as some strict doctrine. It was lived, and it all started with the mother. In this canon, the mother isn't just a character. She's the embodied maternal field of the voyage. And the care she provided wasn't some abstract, distant sentiment. It was the absolute practical root of their entire communal structure. She knew when someone just needed food before they needed to talk. She used patience, social intelligence, and sometimes literally just a well-timed joke to keep a cramped, stressful boat livable. Because let's face it, out there you can't exactly go for a walk to cool off. She made hardship survivable through practical, everyday love. Let's move to and see how this builds, because alongside the mother's care was the father, the navigator. He taught the people how to pay attention using four very specific physical gestures. Let's look at how these build on one another, because these four gestures, they are the foundational practices of finding your bearing before you act. The very first gesture is breath. The navigator would place a hand near the nose. And this wasn't some complex meditation technique. It was a physical tether. It simply meant return to the air leaving the body. Start there. Before you speak in anger, before you panic, just return to your breath. It's the absolute simplest, oldest practice of establishing safety and becoming present before language or action even begins. The second gesture is wind, just a finger pointed toward the wind. It's this beautiful visual that reminds us direction must be read before it's chosen. Think about it. Before you adjust a sail, you have to know what the wind is already doing, right? In our own lives, it means we absolutely must listen to what the world is already speaking before we try to impose our own movement onto it. The third gesture is the rope, a simple touch to a plain tan rope. So the crucial point here is that the rope represents responsibility, sure, but it also represents the strict limit of action. Love and care are not pretending that limits don't exist. We have to remember what can be done and, tragically, what cannot be done. And the fourth and final gesture is the child, a glance toward a child nearby. This brilliantly centers care right back into the middle of the community. It forces a really critical pause to ask, who is directly affected by what we do next? You just cannot build, you cannot act, without remembering the vulnerable people who will actually have to live inside the consequences of your actions. But this living, loving, beautifully structured community is interrupted by profound tragedy, the loss at sea. The mother goes overboard, and in a moment of just terrifying reality, the boat simply cannot turn against the wind and the current. That plain tan rope is thrown out to her, but it falls horribly short. This moment gives us one of the most powerful canonical statements in the entire second weaving. Long enough to reveal love, not long enough to save. I really want that to land with you. The rope proves that love moved, that they tried desperately to rescue her. But it also forms this unbearable limit of action. And it is this exact limit, this profound trauma, that forever changes the navigator. And this brilliantly illustrates how the father transforms. After the loss of the mother, he actually stops speaking entirely. He becomes the silent one. But his silence, it isn't an empty void. It is compressed speech. Because the boat world had already been so deeply trained in those four gestures, breath, wind, rope, and child, he didn't even need words anymore. He continued to teach and lead simply by pointing, using his physical presence to hold all that grief and the community together. As time moves forward and the people eventually reach land to build a settlement, a new figure emerges, the son. Now, he inherits all of that warmth and social intelligence from the mother, and he inherits the deep attention, silence, and bearing of the father. But the son recognizes something vital. As the community grows, memory alone just isn't going to be enough. Future generations need handles to hold on to, so he becomes the careful codifier. He doesn't invent new laws, he simply gives durable speech to the wisdom that love had already taught them back on the boat. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the mother's everyday, lived care gets translated into communal form. The son names these the 4 pillars. They are shared stewardship, mutual responsibility, equal standing, and accountable cooperation. I want you to notice the dignity and the weight in those full names. They aren't just empty corporate buzzwords. They are the exact, practical ways the mother kept them alive on the water, now serving as the solid foundation for how they'll live together on land. Alongside those pillars, the son also writes down 3 guide bearings. It's essentially a foundational compass for holding power and initiating action. Number 1, the guide star, bless many, harm none. Number 2, the trade wind, steward life, signal, and field. And number 3, the bearing, listen before making. These guideposts tell the people what direction must never be betrayed, what they're responsible for protecting, and exactly how they should begin any new endeavor. To all of this, the gestures, the pillars, the guide bearings, this whole collection is the Navigator Codex. It's a small book of bearings for returning to relation. And to be clear, it is not meant to be some religious scripture. It's definitely not a rigid rule book designed to control people or fantasy lore. It is a deeply practical, lived philosophy. It's exactly what you'd keep in your pocket to remind you how to find your way back to yourself and your community when things get totally chaotic. So what does all of this mean for us, right? Why does this ancient mythic wisdom matter right now? Well, because every act begins before the act. If you want to build something new, especially powerful new technologies, you absolutely have to understand what it means to build with care. As you'll see later on, these exact principles of attention, restraint, and listening before making are going to become the architectural design foundation for a completely new kind of digital interface. We're literally looking at the blueprint for technology that actually respects the user's field. But before we can even start to build that interface, we need to understand how this community managed to hold on to these massive concepts. In our next explainer, we're going to explore the symbols that remember. We'll be looking at the physical anchors of this memory, the tree at the edge of the settlement, the power of the breath, and the emergence of the Quetra. Before you make your next move in the digital world today, ask yourself, have you found your bearing? Follow Fidelitas for the next chapter of the second weaving.